I'll kick off. So obviously, I've met with the majority of you, but I suppose for those that will be watching this back, I run the exec desk here at Four. So predominantly hires of FD, CFO, MD, operations directors. But my kind of background is mainly within finance. So the majority of positions now that I do fill are kind of in and around that FD and CFO space. So a number of my colleagues at Four, and myself as well in the past, have always get asked questions on kind of career advice and obviously moving up the ladder. And one of those is obviously from very senior finance professionals, especially probably at that kind of financial controller level. And it's usually around what do I need to do next to get to that finance director position, and whether that's kind of interview advice or just what key skills they need to have behind them before they take the move, and not maybe make that move a bit too early, which I think a lot of people that I've dealt with over the years have maybe done that. So the purpose of this video really is just to kind of help out with a few handy tips, whether that's kind of interview advice or, as I say, kind of key skills that probably need to make sure they have before they make the move up to FD. At the end of the day, I'm a recruiter. Yes, I speak with FDs, CFOs every single day, all day, and there's a lot of advice that I can give, but it's usually more around kind of the interview process. I'm not an accountant at the end of the day, so there's a lot of stuff that I can't assist with. It's just kind of going off experiences of having conversations on a regular basis. So I suppose what I'll do is I'll ask a number of questions and obviously direct them to certain individuals. I'll give a bit of an overview on your backgrounds, but it'd be good as well when I ask the question just to give you a brief background of yourself. So we'll kick off with the first question, which is kind of more to do with kind of the interview prep. So if I was kind of going out for that interview for finance director, what kind of advice would you potentially give? And I'll ask that question to Nick Coolin, and quite relevant really, because Nick recently moved from Boohoo Man and has taken on his first FD role over Online for Baby. So Nick, if I ask you that question first.
Yeah, so I'll just introduce myself quickly. So I'm Nick Cooling. I'm the CFO at Online for Baby, which is a e-commerce nursery products retailer based in North Manchester. So prior, I worked as head of finance at Boohoo Man for just over 12 months, and before that, I spent 8 years at Warburton's doing a variety of roles. So I've reflected on this question, and obviously I've been through an interview process within sort of the past 6 months in relation to this role. And I suppose initially, my advice would be, there's an obvious point around looking at your skills and experience and how that dovetails with the competencies of the business that you're specifically interviewing for, and how you position yourself in that sense. But actually, I think the one thing that stood out in the interview process that I went through for Online for Baby was more behavioural. So you've got to think that you're moving into a role where you're more than just a finance person or an accountant. You're a senior leader, and particularly a motivator in the business that you're joining. And one of the things that stood out to me when I joined Online for Baby was I had some feedback that through the interview process that I went through, and particularly in terms of the second stage, it was observed that when I went into the office to go through to the board meeting to have my second interview, that I was I was the only candidate that really engaged with the people, sat at the desks in the offices saying hello, asking how they were, and being generally warm, whereas I was told that the other candidates maybe didn't display that, and that really set myself apart in the process versus some other candidates that will have had very similar skills and experience to me. So I think that's one thing really that sticks in my mind, that you've got to be able to show how you can be perceived as a warm, engaging individual, but also a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's to be honest, it's some of the basics that really, in a nutshell. It's not even to do with so much the skill set as well. So really, really good advice. Chris, over to you as well. I think, again, Chris has literally just got an FD role. within the last couple of months.
Yeah.
It's kind of hot off the press. Even I don't know where Chris is actually going to. It's a logistics business over in Lancashire. So, Chris, obviously you've again just had this experience very recently. So, be good to kind of get your thoughts on this one.
Yep, no problem. Yep. So Chris Horton, currently the group financial controller at the Whitaker Group, which is a manufacturing business based in Manchester. I've been there 10 years. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in practice, working with a variety of SME businesses on various audit and outsourcing projects. I've recently gone through an interview process for my first FD role. And I think that the main kind of takeaway I have from kind of that successful process is really, from a practical standpoint, over preparing. I think you can't stress enough how much time you should be spending, as a prospective candidate, to really pick apart the job spec, pick apart all the requirements that the recruiters kind of outlined to you in terms of what the role is going to be. I found you really need to have a credible elevator pitch as well, kind of going into an interview, having that 5-minute outline of what your career to date is, and making sure that you can pick up all the key topics that you want to hit, and kind of lay the foundation for what the interview is going to be. From your perspective, making sure that you're kind of outlining all your key skills and why you think you're the best candidate for the role. It really is about just making sure you put the time in beforehand to have basically every base covered.
Yeah, excellent. Does anybody else have any kind of key things on that, or do you think we covered some of the main things?
I think just building on what Nick and Chris have said there. I think it's really good point about you're a senior leader in the organisation, and it's a bit bigger than just the finance department. And I think it's really important to be able to demonstrate your passion for the organisation, for the sector they operate in, and the organisation strategy as well, because you're going to be a key part of delivering that, of being an ambassador for the organisation, as well as obviously looking after the finance team.
Yeah, excellent. So moving on to the next question. This is looking around, really kind of moving into that FD role, and maybe doing it a little bit too early. And what key things really does an FD have to have kind of under his belt, in your opinion, before they make that move? So I'll ask first of all Craig Valentine. Craig's the FD over Crown Paints over in Darwin. So over to Craig.
Cheers, Neil. Just a bit of background. I started on the grad scheme at Pilkington's over in St Helens, a global glass manufacturer. Spent 10 years there, similar to Nick, in many different roles. Then I moved to Crown Paints as a commercial finance manager. And the last 2 years I've been the FD there. So that's a bit about me. In terms of experiences and skills, I think key is kind of commercial exposure. Often when you start out and you get stuck behind the spreadsheets and all your standards and the techie accounting, as Nick mentioned, as Rob mentioned, it's being about a leader of the business, and all businesses, the key to them is the commercial area. You end up being the right hand person to the MD or the CEO. So having that understanding and the knowledge of the commercial function, I think, is key. A couple of things. One, you understand the pain points of the commercial teams, but also you can understand where you can drive value for your business as well in that area. So say commercial, you can get that either through doing roles, like I was lucky enough to get a commercial finance role, but put yourself in opportunities to do projects with the commercial team as well. It's not all about having your role defining what you are doing, but looking for opportunities to get that exposure as well is kind of key, I think. And another one, I think, is you find this very quickly when you become an FD, is change management. I'm not saying I'm an expert at it at all. If any of my team are watching this, then they'll probably agree. But it's something that as a leader of the business, your business will look to you to motivate change, to drive change. And again, putting yourself in experiences to get that that change management exposure is key. That could be through many different projects, training courses, but I think there's nothing better than on-the-job experience for it. And learn from your mistakes, because you'll make plenty of them in change management processes. Obviously, you've got all the softer skills as well. I think is key. Communication, leadership in general. So again, if you haven't got a team, can you lead a project and be able to demonstrate that? But communication, being a confident public speaker, gets more and more important. I used to hate it. When I was a graduate, I couldn't think of anything worse of doing big speeches. But you get put in this, you put yourself in that position more and more, and you get used to it, and I actually quite enjoy it now. But having that confidence when you are speaking to people, it lets people know that they can be confident in what you're telling them as well. So I think that's key.
Looking again at kind of when you move into these shoes, so what challenges and things potentially crop up that you hadn't experienced prior when you were a financial controller or in another senior finance position? And if I ask this question over to Rachel Domain, Rachel's the FD over at Edge Worldwide Logistics. So hi, Rachel.
Hi. Yep. So bit of background. I've only been at Edge for 6 months. So relatively new role and my first FD role. So prior to that, I'd worked at the very group for 3 years. So spent quite a lot of time in retail and quite big corporate businesses. So it's been quite a culture change moving to a much smaller family-run business. So I think that's probably one of the challenges that I faced initially. So touching on what Craig said about change management, I think the businesses that I'd worked with previously, change was constant. It was part of our roadmap. Moving into Edge, into logistics, quite archaic, I guess, in terms of sector, very manual processes, and starting to try and drive that change initiative has probably been the most challenging, because it's getting people used to change and taking them on the journey. And I think more so now, that's much more part of the FD's role. It's that strategic roadmap, always looking to the future as to how you're going to improve and create some efficiency. So I guess that's been one of the challenges. I guess ultimately, straight into the FD role, the buck stops with you. So it's the first time when you're ultimately responsible for all those decisions. So you don't have that final check with your boss to see, is this the right thing to do? And I think you've just got to be confident in your decisions. You've earned your place in this role based on your experience, your exposure to lots of different things in finance. And I think you've just got to be confident with, what you believe the right thing to do is for the business.
Yeah, excellent. If I ask the same question over to Matthew. So Matthew is the FD over at Utility Group, ESG. Matthew?
Yeah. Hi, guys. So I'm currently FD at ESG, as it's rebranded now. Utility Group was last year. We're a predominantly software development company. That's what we kind of do. Been FD here now for just approaching 2 years. Actually been with the company probably 4.5 years now, nearly 5 years. Came in as kind of head of finance and progressed up to FD level following PE changes. Prior to that, I spent 3 or 4 years working in financial services for a company called Key Retirement in the Northwest in Preston, around equity lease and later life lending. So spent a few years in that. So yeah, that's pretty much my background. I mean, in terms of the challenges, I think it's kind of echoing what everybody else has really said, but I think one of the key things for me, what I found was, as you step into that role, is building a team, not both the team internally that you rely on and work with every day, but your team of advisors that you put around you. So, I'll never claim to be the tax expert in anything. So, building the right tax advisors that help you along the way, and those external people that you can really lean on in situations where you need it. Because I think back to Rachel's point, kind of the book does sit with you. So, you need to make some of those decisions, and you need the right people to get the right advice from to be able to make the most informed and the best decision that you can in the position that you put in. So that was one of the challenges. I think the other one, again, is really one that Rachel touched on, which is the decision does sit with you, but I think you start to become the decision maker for things outside of just finance. In previous controller roles, you are kind of just, the decision is just finance, but my role's evolved over the time I've been with ESG, and that's now I've got corporate IT in there, so I'm having to make decisions around the corporate IT structure and how we protect the business in that sense. I've got teams around client reporting, so how do we make our reporting in the business more efficient? So you start to leak into all these different areas of the business. And again, you've got to build the right teams underneath you to be able to get you the right information to make the right decisions around those new areas. So I think that was the two kind of key challenges for me, moving from a kind of finance controller or head of finance position into that FD position. And then I think the last thing was just the natural exposure that you then get to your investors. Obviously, I've worked heavily in the last two roles around private equity, and that's quite a demanding relationship between you and the investor. And it's helping and working with your CEO and being able to manage that relationship with the investors along and balancing that up with the relationship with all the internal stakeholders around your board table as well. But yeah, that was kind of the key three things for me.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Matthew. Anybody else kind of in terms of challenges that they probably didn't face before they were an FD?
I think it's making sure that you don't put yourself under too much pressure. So like Matthew alluded to, you have to use your network because you haven't got all the answers. As much as you'll have had lots of exposure in different areas, there'll be some things that you haven't led on or haven't, completed a project on. And you've just got to use your network and your advisors, and, you're not going to have the answers to everything, and be okay with that.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Now, moving on to the good part, so the rewards of being an FD. So ultimately, what everybody's striving to get to that position for. So obviously, just again, some of the key things that you've found since going into that role that you have felt have been really, really rewarded. So if I ask this to Andrew Clivero, Andrew's the FD over at Cars Engineering.
Hi everybody. Just said I'm FD of Cars Engineering, part of the wider Cars group. We're based up here in Carlisle, but I'm originally from the Northwest. I've been with Cars for 3.5 years. First of all, in a group-wide head of business finance role, so overseeing all the finance teams in the wider Cars business, because Cars itself is a collection of up to 20 individual businesses all under common ownership. And I'm now FD of the engineering part of that, which is 7 engineering businesses based across the UK, but also in Germany and the US, so which brings its own challenges. But the thing I think I'd pick on as being the most rewarding part of being an FD is just absolutely the team. We're lucky here to have some really, really good people. And it's great to be in that FD role where you're pushing the strategy about how finance is structured to best support the business, and identifying with the individuals we have and how we push them on so they feel like they've got a future here in the group. And that's also what I've missed most over the last year is that interaction, because it's been so difficult through COVID. There were found benefits. And certainly some of the teams we have in the US, actually just through Teams and more interaction on a day-to-day basis, some things have got better, but it's been really hard. And the most rewarding part of being an FD is something we also just have as a common objective through all the finance teams here at Cars, is being, finance being the last person in the room where the decisions are being made. And it's the key skills we look to promote it here are being, credibility of finance and being the influencer, and something we look to mark and look how we can make it better is, we identify that you think about the month-end process around preparing management information packs, all the stuff finance has to do. we identify that as being a non-value adding activity. What we say is, right, so once that information is being prepared, how do we promote it within the businesses, and how do we drive that decision-making process, rather than, what I've seen in some organisations is finance produce the information and just throw it over the fence and move on. We just identify, well, how do we get away from that process and make finance, exactly like I've said there, a credible influencer, and developing those skills within finance that some accountants don't have, persuasion, credibility, influence, and it's the softer skills of finance, rather than, when I've been in more financial controller type jobs, it's the numbers rather than the decision making, and that's what I find most rewarding.
Yeah, brilliant. Same question over to Lindsay Brett. Lindsay's the FD over at Change Housing. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Neil. Thank you. Yeah, so I've been at Change Housing as FD for just over a year now. Prior to that, I spent 13 years with Brand Addition. So very, very different sectors for me. Promotional merchandise, where I progressed through to commercial finance director, and now Change Housing, who are an organisation relatively new, looking to support small housing providers and really sort of upskill their organisations, so provide that sort of strategy piece for them. So for me, I'm really going to echo a lot of what Andrew has said. For me, it is about bringing those numbers to life. I would completely agree that the month-end process doesn't add value. You need to do it as quickly as possible, so that you can get to the sort of end conclusion of that and take the messages from those numbers out to the business. And really sort of, working with that wider leadership team across the business is the rewarding part for me. Looking at other parts of the organisation, understanding how they work, and being able to support that with some really credible data, so that we can make the right decisions. And then you're part of that wider team, and you're part of celebrating the wider business successes. A success in terms of bringing in a new client rarely doesn't involve the finance team these days, or it shouldn't. I've been involved sort of throughout the evolution of that. And then I think the other one is absolutely the team, and taking them on that journey with you. So, I've been fortunate enough that I have worked with people in my team across a couple of different organisations, from practice to Brand Addition, and now to Change as well. And I think sort of seeing their progression and seeing the future FDs in the making, and sort of being able to influence that, to help create quite a healthy culture, it is really enjoyable. So yeah, they're the things for me that sort of make me feel warm when I go home at night.
Excellent, thanks, Lindsay. Anybody else on that? I'm hoping rewards, you'd all be shouting from the hills of what rewards you get as being an FD. Anybody else on that one? Or
I think it's echoing what Lindsay and Andrew have said. It's, you're at the heart of the decision making process when you're an FD, and I think we've all kind of mentioned it. It's not about the techie accounting. You need to be proficient in that, but it's around the strategy, implementing change, driving value. So seeing ideas come to life that you've been involved in, whether it be new products, new services, investments, it makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, excellent. The final question. So kind of touching really on what I mentioned really early on about maybe people taking the move a little bit too early in the career. So this last question is really about kind of if you could kind of turn back time almost, what one, if you were pinpointing one skill set to have had before you made that move, what would that have been, and what would you wish you could have probably had under your belt before you took the seat as an FD? So if I ask this question over to Rob Mellor, who's the FD over at UCLan.
I'm the hi everyone. I'm the Director of Finance Operations at the University of Central Lancashire. And my background prior to that, I was CFO at Further Education College. Before that, I worked as a finance director for Capita on a variety of public-private partnerships. I think for me, being in FD and being in a senior finance role, it is all about the variety actually, and all of those things that you've learned through your career, all those good experiences, all those bad experiences are part of that package that gives you the resilience and the know-how, to go forward in your current role and your future roles. I think. Really an answer to the question that builds on what Craig mentioned earlier and linked in with what others have mentioned also. I think that commercial experience is really, really important. It isn't enough just to technically know how to do the numbers. It really is understanding how the numbers are used within the organisation and how the work of finance really does influence the strategy of the organisation and the success of the organisation. So for me, early on in the career, I think it's really important to be trying to get some commercial experience, some operational experience, and see life outside of the finance department.
Yeah, excellent. Passing over to Ian Roberts, who's the commercial FD over at JD Sports.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Ian Roberts. I've worked with JD for just over 4 years now as international FD, and prior to that, I worked for Screwfix. Based over in Germany, and prior to that I worked for Clark Shoes, and that's probably my longest stint in finance. I was circa around 13 years and did several roles in there, so I built my career basically there before I moved on to more senior roles. I think for me, and it is quite specific for me, what I would have done different or would have liked to have known or experienced differently is probably the mergers and acquisitions world. If you experience where JD is at, and you've probably seen a lot in the press, a lot of our growth, besides the organic piece, has been mergers and acquisitions. And the actual process itself is not actually a difficult one. Actually pulling the deal together and going through the due diligence is fairly straightforward. It's actually, and it echoes the thing what other people have talked about, it's the relationship afterwards, because a lot of the deals that we do, we retain a partnership with the acquisitions that we've made. So we may retain a fascia, we may keep part of the prior owners on as operators. So they've got an emotional attachment to that business, and you're coming in from a group perspective, wanting people to do things slightly differently. So you're taking them on a journey of what JD is about. You'll have to invest a lot of time with those guys to understand their business, where they've come from, how they've grown, how they operate, how that sort of then merges into your world. And I think it's all around that sort of relationship, and you become a much more that sort of reliance on you as an individual becomes much greater than your finance knowledge. And again, it echoes what people have said before. You become they trust you. You become a central point. So they'll come back to you lots of queries, lots of questions, and it may be just totally outside of your field of finance, but you're expected to sort of be able to guide them, know the answer. So it's that operational knowledge of their business. You have to demonstrate that you understand where they're coming from. You have to understand how you can sort of take them on that journey with you to become part of the JD world. So it's relationships for me. But if I'd have gone back to what would I have known more about that, I hadn't experienced that in other companies. So that was quite a learn for me. One I've actually enjoyed. It's been great because you meet so many different characters, but it's been quite an experience I would have liked to have had.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for that, Ian. David, are you back in? Can you
hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I think that question links on quite. It's quite similar to the question that I asked you, originally. So do you want to kick on again with that one?
Yeah. I mean, just to give you a bit
ISS, everyone. So
just to give you a bit of background on myself. So I started work in audit practice. I spent my first 7 years there, qualified. Then I moved into an SME for a couple of years. I spent 10 years at Sodexo, which is a facilities management company. And then I've spent the last 8 months at ISS, where I'm the commercial finance director. So again, going through experience, my one piece of advice is be proactive. So your career is in your own hands. Don't rely on somebody else leaving or somebody else to tell you, what you need to do. You need to go out there and have a look at yourself. For example, skills and experiences. Have a look at the job description for finance director. There's many on LinkedIn if you want to go external. If you want to keep internal, even better, you can ask for the job description as well as the competency-based questions. And a lot of those questions, and again, this feeds on from the interview process, are very similar. So, you can build up the best examples to give you the best opportunity to get the role. So when you're going into an interview, be prepared, read the questions, and then build on all the skills. So you might not necessarily have all the skills and experiences, but you can plan accordingly and set yourself sort of mini targets. So whether you're 5 years, 3 years, 1 year off becoming an FD, you can plan how many roles that you need to do or get those experiences to become an FD. So I suggest like putting yourself in those situations. You can take projects on board, try and raise your profile with the individuals that make the decisions as well. So if you're moving internal, try and work for to do a project for that individual, so they get exposure and they know what you're about. Half the role is kind of trust. So a lot of the people on this call will have the technical ability. A lot of the roles ask for a qualification. So it doesn't really matter too much which qualification, but if you want to set yourself apart, research the company, see what qualification they prefer. And again, if you're 3 years off, you've got plenty of time to get your professional qualification, get your experiences. And I think that's the kind of main thing. Feeding off from what Craig said, communication for me is probably one of the biggest things, because you need to be able to articulate, complex financial issues to non-finance people. So you don't want to lose them. You want to keep it simple, bring them on board. And it's just really important. Put yourself into situations you don't like presentation. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then you instill trust and have passion for the business as well, because how are you going to motivate the team if you're not motivated yourself? So you need to work for a business that you really, trust, you really want to work for it, and you can motivate the team. So I think that's kind of it in terms of, in a nutshell, skills and experiences.
Thanks, Dave. It's good to hear you.
Going back to the interview, be prepared as well. Try and sort out the technical issues in advance.
Yeah.
I think I can learn from that one.
Yeah, don't do a Zoom with no sound, because you definitely do a better job. Anybody else to kind of throw in any last kind of comments, I suppose, before we close? Any extra little bits of advice on anything that you've kind of come across today, or?
I think just going to say is what people have touched on earlier on is about being yourself and have confidence in what you've achieved and what you've done, and demonstrate that what's relevant to the business that you maybe aspire to be working for. Because the fact that, whether you've gone through a recruiter or, whatever the process is, you decide to actually go for that role, someone will have identified you do have the right skills in there. So, be confident in what you've done and what you've achieved, and just really emphasize, what you can, from that skills you've learned, what you can bring to a new business.
Yeah, excellent. Anybody else?
Just on your very last question, Neil, in terms of kind of what would you go back and make sure you have, I'd probably flip that question and say to people, don't worry too much about what you don't have. Right. Yeah, I think Matthew said it. You're not going to be expert in everything, and no one is, so you surround yourself with good people, good team, great advisors. So, the experts are out there to help you. I think if you try and get all the experience, you might miss out on an opportunity that's in front of you. So, take a bit of risk, but, back yourself, as Ian's just said.